Let me tell you something powerful. Two people can work in the same company, sit in the same office, earn the same paycheck. Yet one will rise to lead, while the other stays exactly where they are. It's not luck. It's not talent. It's mindset. Because leadership doesn't start with a position, it starts with a perspective. And the moment you begin to think differently about your work, your value, and your future, everything changes. If you've ever wondered why some people rise while others remain stuck, stay with me. Because today, we're going to uncover the mindset that separates leaders from workers. And once you understand it, you'll never look at your own potential the same way again. You see, the world doesn't reward activity. It rewards results. And that's the first place where most people get it wrong. Workers think in terms of effort. Leaders think in terms of outcome. A worker says, I worked 8 hours today. A leader says, what did I create in those 8 hours? A worker thinks about doing their job. A leader thinks about improving it. A worker waits for instructions. A leader asks, what can be made better? Now here's why this matters. The moment you shift your thinking from doing to leading, life starts handing you opportunities that were invisible before. Because leadership isn't about having people follow you. It's about becoming the kind of person others want to follow. It's not about position. It's about perception. Not about control, but about contribution. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you 3 key mindsets that separate those who simply work from those who lead. Each one has the power to change how you show up every day, how people see you, and how far you rise. So don't just listen, absorb. Because once you see the difference, you'll never go back to thinking like a worker again. A worker shows up because they have to, but a leader shows up because they choose to. That's the beginning of ownership, and it changes everything. It's not about what you're told to do, but about how you see yourself in the process. When you take ownership, you stop waiting for someone else to take responsibility for the direction of your life, your work, your results. Ownership says, if it's to be, it's up to me. And that single phrase separates the ones who drift from the ones who drive. Because the worker mindset seeks permission, but the leader mindset seeks possibility. A worker waits to be told what's wrong. A leader looks for it before anyone else notices. A worker focuses on doing what's expected, but a leader focuses on exceeding expectations. Ownership is not just about taking control of your tasks. It's about taking control of your destiny. It's understanding that the quality of your life rises or falls based on the standard you set for yourself, not the one set by others. When you take ownership, you stop saying, that's not my fault, and start asking, what could I have done better? That's where growth begins. Growth begins the moment blame ends. The average person spends so much energy defending their mistakes that they never have enough energy left to fix them. But the person who leads accepts that mistakes are part of mastery. They don't fear being wrong, they fear not improving. Ownership gives you power because it keeps you from being a victim. You see, victims believe life happens to them. Leaders believe life happens through them. The worker sees problems and says, who caused this? The leader sees the same problem and says, what can we learn from this? That's the difference in mentality that transforms not only your work, but your entire life. Because ownership doesn't just improve your performance, it builds your character. People often think leadership starts when you get promoted, but that's false. Leadership starts when you start leading yourself. The moment you take full responsibility for your behavior, your results, and your growth, you've already stepped into leadership. You might not have the title, but you have the attitude. And the truth is, attitude will always outrank title. People don't follow the name on your badge. They follow the example you live. A leader's influence doesn't come from authority. It comes from authenticity. And authenticity begins when you own who you are and what you're capable of becoming. Every day, thousands of people clock in to their jobs with the same mindset they had the day before. I'm here to do my part. But the leader walks in thinking, I'm here to make things better. The worker does what's required. The leader does what's necessary. And that difference compounds over time. Because when you think like an owner, your perspective changes. You start to see the bigger picture. You understand how one small decision can affect the entire operation. You realize that everything you touch carries your fingerprint, and you start asking yourself, what kind of impression am I leaving? That's when excellence becomes natural, because you're no longer performing out of obligation. You're performing out of pride. Ownership is contagious. When you start taking responsibility, others feel it. They start trusting you more. They start looking to you for direction, even if no one ever gave you that role. That's how leaders rise, by demonstrating reliability before being rewarded with authority. And it all starts with how you handle the small things. When you own your time, your promises, your work ethic, your discipline, people notice. You don't have to announce it. Consistency speaks louder than words. Leadership doesn't show up in grand gestures. It's found in the quiet moments when no one's watching, but you still do your best. Think about how most people approach their day. They work for the paycheck. But an owner works for the outcome. One is motivated by survival. The other is motivated by significance. The worker says, it's not my problem. The leader says, if it affects us, it involves me. The worker protects their comfort. The leader protects the mission. The worker avoids blame. The leader accepts responsibility. That's why leaders grow faster, because ownership keeps you learning, and learning keeps you advancing. The worker avoids mistakes. The leader analyzes them. The worker says, someone should fix this. The leader says, let's find a way to fix it. That single difference in mindset is what makes people trust leaders with bigger opportunities. Ownership also means emotional maturity. You can't lead if your emotions control you. Workers react, leaders respond. The worker gets frustrated and checks out. The leader gets frustrated and asks, what can this teach me? Ownership turns frustration into feedback. It turns disappointment into determination. It turns failure into fuel. And once you develop that attitude, you stop fearing what can go wrong and start focusing on what can go right. Because ownership isn't about being in control of everything. It's about being accountable for everything that's within your control. Leaders don't wait for ideal conditions. They create them. A worker might say, I can't do my best work until things get better. The leader says, things will get better because I'll do my best work. That's ownership in action. It's proactive instead of reactive. It's cause instead of effect. And it's the reason why leaders often get promoted above people who have been around longer. Because leadership isn't about how long you've been doing something, but how seriously you take responsibility for it. Ownership also shows up in the way you talk. The worker says, they told me to do it. The leader says, here's what we decided to do. The worker distances themselves from the outcome. The leader aligns themselves with it. Language reveals mindset. When you speak as if you have no power, you strip yourself of it. When you speak as if you are responsible, you gain influence automatically. Because ownership communicates belief. Belief in your role, your team, and your purpose. The hardest part about ownership is that it demands self-discipline. It's easy to take credit. It's harder to take responsibility. It's easy to say, "It's not my problem." It's harder to say, "Let me help fix it." But that's where transformation begins, in the moments where most people quit, but you stay. When most people complain, but you contribute. When most people say, "Someone should do something," and you say, "I'll start." Ownership doesn't always get recognized immediately, but it always gets rewarded eventually, because people remember those who made things work when they could have easily walked away. True leaders are never waiting for someone to notice their effort. They're too busy making an impact. They don't work for approval. They work for improvement. They don't ask, "Why isn't someone doing something?" They ask, "What can I do right now to move this forward?" That's what gives them influence before they even have authority. The worker focuses on instructions. The leader focuses on intentions. The worker worries about doing things right. The leader worries about doing the right things. And that's what separates those who simply execute from those who inspire. When you take ownership, your relationship with work changes. You start to see that you're not just part of the process. You're a part of the progress. You realize that every action you take contributes to a larger picture. You stop thinking like a passenger and start thinking like a pilot. And when you think like a pilot, you stop waiting for direction because you understand the destination. Ownership gives you clarity. It makes you decisive. It removes the excuses that hold you back and replaces them with actions that move you forward. Ownership isn't glamorous at first. It doesn't come with applause or titles. But over time, it builds a reputation that money can't buy. People begin to rely on you, trust you, and follow you because they see that you take things personally. In the best way possible. You care enough to make sure it's done right. You show up when it matters. You finish what you start. And in doing so, you become the kind of person others aspire to be, because leadership begins when you stop waiting for permission to lead and start owning the space you're already in. Workers think about today, but leaders think about tomorrow. That single shift in perspective changes everything about how a person moves through life. Most people are caught in the urgency of the moment. They focus on surviving the day, getting through the week, meeting the deadline. But a leader understands that today is simply a seed for what tomorrow will become. Every action, every habit, every decision compounds into the future. The worker looks for immediate reward, but the leader looks for lasting return. And that's the quiet difference that determines who climbs and who stays where they are. A worker says, "I just need to get through this." But a leader says, "What will this lead to?" The worker is focused on finishing, while the leader is focused on building. Because the worker's goal is completion, but the leader's goal is continuation. One is thinking about the task, the other is thinking about the trajectory. The moment you start thinking long term, your choices begin to change. You start trading short bursts of pleasure for long-term progress. You stop needing recognition right now because you understand that real value takes time to reveal itself. The leader doesn't need to be noticed today because they know the results will speak tomorrow. When you think long-term, you stop being reactive. Most people live in reaction. They respond to problems, people pressure, and pain without a plan. But leaders operate by principle. They don't make decisions based on mood. They make decisions based on mission. They understand that every small choice today shapes the direction of tomorrow. The worker wants fast results. The leader wants real results. That's why patience becomes a strength, not a weakness. A leader knows that slow progress is still progress, and that what's built fast rarely lasts. The worker wants to be promoted next month. The leader is preparing to be valuable for the next decade. Thinking long-term means you start asking different questions. Instead of, what do I get now? You start asking, who am I becoming through this? Instead of, how can I look good today? You ask, how can I grow stronger for tomorrow? It's a perspective shift that few are willing to make because it demands sacrifice. The worker wants comfort now. The leader is willing to trade comfort for compound growth. The worker wants the result without the season of preparation. But the leader embraces the process because they understand that the process is what produces permanence. The worker looks for shortcuts, but the leader understands that shortcuts often cut short your potential. Every great leader knows the power of delayed gratification. They understand that what feels like sacrifice now often turns into satisfaction later. The worker spends, the leader invests. The worker consumes, the leader creates. The worker wants to enjoy the weekend, the leader wants to enjoy the legacy. And that's why leaders outlast everyone else. They're playing a longer game. The leader knows that planting seeds today means harvesting success tomorrow, while the worker is still wondering why nothing grows after they've stopped watering it. Thinking long-term also means you value learning over immediate earning. The worker asks, how much does it pay? The leader asks, how much will this teach me? Because the leader knows that skills outlive salaries. Every new lesson, every failure, every challenge adds value to your future self. A worker sees a difficult task as an inconvenience. A leader sees it as an investment in wisdom. The worker avoids discomfort because it feels unproductive. The leader embraces discomfort because it feels developmental. Growth is rarely comfortable, but it's always worth it. The worker measures progress by the day. The leader measures progress by direction. A worker might have good days and bad days, but a leader looks at where the path is taking them. One setback doesn't shake them because they're not thinking about today's score. They're focused on the season's outcome. They understand that success is not a single event. It's the accumulation of consistent effort over time. The worker wants things to happen quickly. The leader wants them to happen correctly. And the longer you think, the more deliberate you become. The more deliberate you become, the more powerful your results grow. A long-term thinker doesn't just ask, what's working now? They ask, what will still be working 5 years from now? That question separates the innovators from the imitators, because workers chase trends, but leaders build timeless principles. A leader's strategy doesn't depend on external applause. It depends on internal clarity. They don't need validation to keep going because they're fueled by vision. And vision is what allows you to stay steady when everyone else is panicking. Workers get discouraged when the results don't come quickly. Leaders stay focused because they understand that every season has its purpose. The leader understands that growth requires compounding. You can't see it immediately, but over time, small consistent effort creates massive change. That's why leaders stay disciplined in the unseen seasons. While others are distracted by instant gratification, they are building quietly, knowing that time will reveal the difference. The worker looks for the next paycheck. The leader looks for the next breakthrough. The worker is driven by necessity. The leader is driven by purpose. One needs to work. The other wants to contribute. Thinking long-term also changes how you handle challenges. Workers see problems as interruptions. Leaders see them as instruction. The worker asks, why is this happening to me? The leader asks, what is this teaching me? Because a long-term thinker knows that pain today often produces wisdom tomorrow. You can't become strong without resistance, just like you can't become wise without experience. The worker tries to avoid difficulty. The leader grows through it. When you have a long-term mindset, setbacks stop feeling final. They start feeling formative. You realize that everything happening now is shaping the leader you're becoming next. A worker lives for the weekend, but a leader builds for the future. That doesn't mean leaders never rest. It means they rest with intention. Even their downtime has purpose. They rest to refuel, not to escape. The worker rests to forget. The leader rests to prepare. That's because the leader knows tomorrow will require more of them than today did. Their vision keeps them grounded and grateful, not restless and reactive. The long-term mindset also changes how you see people. Workers see people as part of the process. Leaders see people as part of the purpose. Workers use people to complete tasks. Leaders develop people to create transformation. Because leaders think beyond the project, they think about the person. They know that real progress happens when people grow, not just when goals are achieved. And that's why leaders build teams, not just work groups. They're not looking for compliance. They're cultivating commitment. The worker thinks about effort. The leader thinks about effect. The worker says, I did my part. The leader says, did it make a difference? Because leaders understand that effort without direction is wasted energy. They're not trying to do more. They're trying to do what matters most. That's why thinking long-term makes you more selective with your time, your habits, your company. You begin to see how every small decision affects your larger destination. Leaders also understand timing. They know that just because something doesn't happen now doesn't mean it won't happen later. The worker grows impatient and quits too soon. The leader stays consistent and lets time do the heavy lifting. They understand that every great tree was once a seed that stayed underground longer than anyone expected. The worker gives up in the waiting. The leader grows in the waiting. They use delay as development. They turn waiting into working. They understand that progress that takes time is progress that stands the test of time. Long-term thinking is the antidote to mediocrity. It's what allows a person to rise above distraction and discouragement. Because when your vision is clear, your decisions get easier. You stop chasing things that don't align with your future. You stop comparing your pace with others because you know everyone's timeline is different. You stop seeking immediate validation because you understand that short-term applause often costs long-term growth. The worker wants success that looks good. The leader wants success that lasts good. And that difference in focus eventually determines who builds something meaningful. The worker thinks of the job. The leader thinks of the journey. The worker thinks of the position. The leader thinks of the purpose. The worker says, what can I get? The leader says, what can I give that will outlive me? And that's where legacy begins. Not in the moment you arrive, but in the mindset that prepares you to endure. A leader doesn't just think about their next move. They think about the next generation that will follow after them. They think in decades, not days. They see the unseen connection between patience and power, between vision and victory, between persistence and purpose. When you think long-term, you begin to operate differently. You don't panic over temporary setbacks. You don't measure success by today's numbers. You measure it by direction, by discipline, by development. Because you understand that the seed planted now will always look small before it grows into something significant. The worker looks for fruit. The leader focuses on the roots. The worker is anxious for progress. The leader is aligned with process. And that's why leaders eventually rise. They stay where others quit. They believe where others doubt. And they keep building what others can't yet see. Workers follow the rules, but leaders raise the standards. The difference is that one simply meets expectations while the other redefines what's possible. A worker says, "Tell me what to do." But a leader asks, "What more can I do?" That single question separates those who stay where they are from those who create new paths for others to follow. Contribution is the heartbeat of leadership. It's not about control or command. It's about adding value in a way that moves things forward. While most people focus on what they can get from a situation, leaders focus on what they can give. They understand that success isn't measured by accumulation, but by contribution. When you make yourself valuable, you don't need to chase opportunities. Opportunities begin to chase you. The worker mindset is driven by compliance. Do what's required, follow the instructions, check the box. It's safe, predictable, and limited. But contribution is different. Contribution says, "I'm not here just to fill the role. I'm here to elevate the role." It's the mindset that transforms average effort into excellence. When you start thinking contribution, your motivation shifts from external reward to internal pride. You stop working for approval and start working from purpose. You stop asking, "What do I have to do?" and start asking, "How can I make this better?" That question alone can change the entire direction of your life. Because contribution gives meaning to the mundane. It turns repetition into refinement. A worker does their part and stops. A leader sees where their part connects to the bigger picture and finds ways to make it stronger. The worker is focused on efficiency. The leader is focused on effectiveness. The worker asks, "Did I finish?" The leader asks, "Did it matter?" That's the difference between activity and impact. Many people are busy all day long, but never truly productive because their focus is on completing tasks instead of creating transformation. Contribution doesn't always mean doing more. It means doing what matters with intention. The worker seeks comfort. The leader seeks contribution. Because comfort leads to stagnation, but contribution leads to growth. When you focus on adding value, you automatically become more valuable. You start noticing things others overlook. You begin to take initiative where others hesitate. You become the person who steps up when something needs to be done, not because you were told to, but because you care. Leaders don't wait for the perfect conditions to contribute. They contribute in any condition. They don't ask if it's their job. They ask if it's worth improving. That's how leaders turn ordinary moments into opportunities for influence. Contribution is not about doing everything yourself. It's about doing what you can with excellence. It's about showing up with the intention to make a difference wherever you are. Whether you're in a small team or a large organization, the spirit of contribution is what builds trust, respect, and admiration. People remember how you make them feel, how you help them grow, and how you lift the standard around you. And that's something a paycheck can't measure. Workers are replaceable because they only bring their hands to the job. Leaders are irreplaceable because they bring their heart. When you think contribution, you stop competing with others and start collaborating with them. The worker says, "I just need to do my part." The leader says, "Let's see how we can make this work better together." Contribution multiplies when shared. The more you give, the more you inspire others to do the same. And soon, your example becomes your influence. People follow those who give, not those who guard. When you help others win, you never lose. Because leadership isn't about being above others, it's about bringing others up with you. Contribution also means taking initiative without being asked. The worker waits for permission, but the leader looks for possibilities. You see a gap, and instead of saying, "That's not my job," you ask, "What if I filled that gap?" That's where innovation begins. Every great advancement in history was created by someone who refused to settle for good enough. They saw what could be better and decided to do something about it. That's the essence of leadership, refusing to accept mediocrity where excellence is possible. When you contribute, you don't just do tasks, you create experiences. You turn work into something meaningful. Even small acts of contribution have ripple effects. Encouraging a teammate, refining a process, offering an idea, these small contributions accumulate into trust and transformation. People might forget what you did, but they'll never forget how your contribution made them feel. Workers execute orders, leaders elevate others. Workers focus on the process, leaders focus on the purpose. The worker mindset often says, I'll do more when I get paid more. But the leader mindset says, when I do more, I become worth more. The difference is that workers see contribution as a transaction. Leaders see it as transformation. When you start adding more value, you don't need to chase rewards. They naturally find their way to you. Because contribution is magnetic. It draws recognition, respect, and results without needing to demand them. People are drawn to those who make things better. The most powerful thing about contribution is that it develops your character. Every time you give beyond what's required, you strengthen the muscle of integrity. Every time you show initiative without being asked, you build credibility. Every time you focus on creating value instead of seeking validation, you reinforce confidence. And over time, that character becomes your brand. People begin to associate your name with reliability, excellence, and growth. And that's what makes leaders unforgettable. They leave an impression of contribution wherever they go. Contribution also transforms how you see obstacles. Workers avoid problems, leaders address them. A worker says, that's too hard. A leader says, that's worth solving. Because leaders understand that contribution is not about convenience. It's about commitment. They don't shrink from difficulty. They see it as an invitation to grow. Every time you overcome a challenge, you increase your capacity. Every time you solve a problem, you expand your influence. The people who consistently bring solutions instead of complaints become indispensable, not because they have authority, but because they have initiative. A worker seeks direction from others. A leader seeks direction from within. Contribution flows from clarity. You can't give your best if you don't know what you stand for. Leaders take time to understand their purpose, their values, their vision. That internal clarity fuels external contribution. You give differently when you know why you're giving. You show up differently when you know what you represent. Contribution is born out of conviction. It's the natural expression of purpose in action. When you think contribution, even your attitude changes. You approach each day with gratitude instead of frustration. You stop seeing your work as a burden and start seeing it as a platform. Every interaction becomes a chance to uplift, every project a chance to grow, every challenge a chance to lead. And when you live with that mindset, you begin to attract the same energy from others. Contribution has a multiplying effect. It inspires, influences, and ignites potential wherever it goes. Contribution also demands excellence. It's not about doing more, it's about doing better. It's about caring enough to give your best, even when no one is watching. Because real leaders don't need an audience to give effort. They don't perform for applause, they perform for alignment. They work with a sense of inner responsibility, knowing that their work is a reflection of their values. The worker does the minimum, the leader gives their maximum. And that's why the leader keeps growing while the worker keeps repeating. The beauty of contribution is that it creates fulfillment. When you know you've added value, there's a deep satisfaction that no external reward can match. Contribution gives purpose to your progress. It reminds you that you're not just passing time. You're shaping lives including your own. The more you contribute, the more connected you feel to your work, your people, and your mission. And that connection fuels consistency, which builds credibility, which attracts opportunity. It's a cycle that keeps expanding the more you give. Workers live for recognition, but leaders live for results. Workers need to be told they matter. Leaders know they matter because they see their impact. The worker thinks contribution is extra. The leader knows it's essential. That's why leaders never run out of motivation. They're not fueled by praise. They're fueled by purpose. When your work becomes your gift to others, motivation becomes automatic. You stop counting hours and start creating outcomes. You stop worrying about who notices, because you understand that true contribution always finds its way back to you in time. Contribution doesn't require a title, a degree, or permission. It requires a decision, the decision to show up and give your best every single day. It's about asking yourself, how can I leave this place, this person, this situation better than I found it? That's the essence of leadership. Not position, not power, but purpose in action. Workers operate by rules. Leaders operate by responsibility. Workers do what's expected. Leaders do what's exceptional. And in the end, it's the spirit of contribution that turns ordinary people into extraordinary leaders